You ever have a problem so persistent, so infuriatingly stupid, that it starts to feel like a mosquito buzzing right inside your skull? Not just in your ear, I mean deep inside your brain, where the really important thoughts are trying to happen. That was my life for 2.5 weeks. And the mosquito had a name, Chad Vance. He was a 19-year-old trust fund baby, with hair the color of bleached straw and the moral compass of a hungry piranha. His mother, Eleanor, was the queen mosquito who'd laid the egg. And his weapon of choice, the little needle he used to poke my last nerve every single morning, was a brand new, obnoxiously loud, midnight black Porsche 911. A beautiful piece of German engineering, I'll admit. But here's the thing about beautiful machines. They're only as smart as the person driving them. And this kid was a few quarts low. He had a 2-car garage, a 4-car driveway, and an entire street of perfectly legal curb space. So where did he park this 6-figure marvel every single morning at 7:15 a.m.? He parked it in my driveway. Not on the street, not blocking the entrance a little bit. I mean, he pulled all the way up right behind my own car, trapping it like a rat in a cage. And when I finally had enough, when all the polite notes and the calm conversations and the calls to the authorities had failed, I didn't just call a tow truck. Oh no, that would have been too simple. I'm a mechanic, you see, a damn good one, and I decided to give that Porsche the kind of special attention it deserved. I didn't just move it, I deconstructed it. By the time I was done, his prized possession looked less like a sports car and more like a very expensive IKEA project someone had given up on halfway through. And the look on his and his mother's faces that morning. Honey, that was a masterpiece. My little corner of the world, Oakmont Hills, is the kind of place people move to when they're done with the noise. It's quiet, tree-lined streets, houses that have been here since the 70s, neighbors who've known each other for decades. I bought my place here 15 years ago with my late wife, Sarah. It was our dream house. A modest little brick rancher, but it was ours. We poured our hearts into it. I built the 2-car garage in the back with my own 2 hands, a sanctuary where I could work on my project cars and listen to old soul music. Sarah planted the garden, azaleas along the fence, climbing roses that snaked up the brick, and 2 big oak trees in the front yard that gave us the perfect shade in the summer. That driveway was her pride and joy for the weirdest reason. She hated street parking, said it made the whole neighborhood look cluttered. So when we had the asphalt ripped up and replaced with these beautiful grey paving stones, she was so happy. "See, Marcus?" she'd said, standing there with her hands on her hips, a smudge of dirt on her cheek from the garden. Clean lines, everything in its proper place. That's peace, right there. After she passed from the cancer 5 years ago, maintaining this place, keeping those clean lines, it wasn't a chore. It was my way of keeping her close. Every mowed lawn, every pruned rosebush was a conversation with her. So when someone disrespects my property, they're not just disrespecting me. They're walking all over the most sacred ground I have. The house across the street had been owned by the Millers, a sweet old couple who moved to Florida to be closer to their grandkids. For a few months it was quiet. Then the for sale sign was replaced by a sold sign, and the circus came to town. The Vance family. I knew they were going to be trouble from the day they moved in. They didn't use a moving company. They used a fleet of shiny new pickup trucks and a crew of guys who shouted at each other all day and left their fast food wrappers all over the Millers' old, pristine lawn. The mother, Eleanor Vance, stood on the porch directing traffic like a drill sergeant in a silk pantsuit, talking on her phone so loud I could hear her complaining about the tacky light fixtures from inside my own living room. Her son, Chad, spent the entire day blasting terrible mumble rap from the speakers of his Porsche, which he kept parking and reparking in the middle of the street, blocking traffic. They were loud, they were messy, and they had an aura of entitlement so thick you could taste it in the air. They were new money, and they wanted everyone to know it. They ripped out the Millers' beautiful garden and replaced it with a bunch of sterile white rocks, and a single sad-looking metal sculpture that looked like a bunch of spoons melted together. They painted the charming brick house a blinding, sterile white. They were erasing all the warmth, all the history, and replacing it with cold, hard cash. And it was only a matter of time before that cold, hard attitude started spilling across the street and onto my property. The first time it happened, I honestly thought it was a mistake. I had an early appointment with a client, a guy with a classic '67 Mustang that needed a full engine rebuild. I walked out of my house at 7:20 a.m., coffee in hand, ready to start my day, and there it was. A gleaming black Porsche, parked smack dab in the middle of my driveway, right behind my own trusty Ford F-150. I was completely blocked in. I stood there for a good 10 seconds, just blinking, trying to make sense of it. Did someone steal it and dump it here? Was it a prank? I looked across the street and saw the Porsche-sized empty space in the Vance's driveway. Then I saw a light on in an upstairs window. My brain finally put two and two together. Chad. For some reason, this kid had decided that my driveway was a better parking spot than his own. My first reaction wasn't even anger. It was just pure, unadulterated confusion. Why? His driveway was empty. The street was empty. It made no logical sense. It was like choosing to use your neighbor's toilet when you have a perfectly good one in your own house. I walked across the street, my coffee getting cold in my hand, and rang the doorbell. After a minute, the door was opened by Eleanor Vance. She was wearing a fluffy pink robe and a face full of last night's makeup. She looked at me with an expression that was halfway between annoyance and boredom. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice raspy. "Good morning," I said, trying to keep my tone as neutral as possible. "I'm Marcus Jones, your neighbor from across the street. I think your son may have parked in my driveway by mistake. He's got me blocked in, and I need to get to work." She didn't apologize. She didn't even seem surprised. She just sighed, a long put-upon sigh, as if I were a telemarketer interrupting her dinner. She turned her head and yelled back into the house, "Chad, your neighbor is here! You need to move your car." There was a muffled groan from upstairs. Eleanor turned back to me. "He'll be down in a minute," she said, and then she just closed the door in my face. No, sorry for the inconvenience. No, I don't know what he was thinking. Just a door clicked shut. I stood there on her sterile white porch for a moment, stunned. The sheer rudeness of it was almost more offensive than the act itself. After about 5 long minutes, Chad finally shuffled out. He was wearing basketball shorts and a wrinkled t-shirt, and he looked at me like I was the problem. He didn't say a word, just trudged over to my driveway, got in his car, backed it out, and pulled it into his own driveway. As he walked back to his house, he shot me a dirty look. Not a single word of apology, not a nod, nothing. It was a declaration of war, and I didn't even know what we were fighting about. I was 20 minutes late for my appointment, and my whole day felt off-kilter. I told myself it was a one-time thing, a weird entitled fluke. Boy, was I wrong. The next morning, it was there again. Same time, same spot, like a bad dream on repeat. This time I was beyond confused. I was angry. The disrespect was intentional now. It wasn't a mistake. It was a statement. He was marking his territory, and for some insane reason, he had decided my driveway was part of it. I had an even more important meeting this time, a consultation with a parts supplier who was flying in from out of town. Being late was not an option. I didn't have time to go over there and wait for Prince Charming to wake up and move his chariot. So I grabbed a pen and a piece of paper and wrote a note. I kept it polite but firm. "Hi, you've parked in my private driveway again and have blocked me in. This is my property. Please do not park here anymore. Thank you." I tucked it under his windshield wiper, got into my wife's old sedan that I kept in the garage for emergencies, and carefully maneuvered it around the Porsche and down the grass on the side of the house. It left ruts in the lawn Sarah and I had worked so hard on. The whole situation was starting to make my blood simmer. I was a grown man, a business owner, a respected member of my community, and I was having to drive on my own lawn because some spoiled brat couldn't be bothered to use his own damn driveway. When I got home that evening, the Porsche was gone, and the note was gone from where I'd put it. I thought, okay, maybe he got the message. Maybe the written word would succeed where a face-to-face conversation had failed. I spent the evening repairing the ruts in the yard, a knot of resentment tightening in my stomach with every scoop of soil. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of dread. I walked to the front window and peered through the blinds. And there it was, the black Porsche, sitting there smugly, gleaming in the morning sun, and tucked under its windshield wiper. My note, he had put it back. It was a middle finger in paper form. That's when the simmer turned into a low boil. My politeness was being mistaken for weakness. My patience was being seen as permission. The time for being the nice, reasonable neighbor was officially over. I wasn't going to drive on my lawn again. I wasn't going to be late for work again. I was going to handle this, and I was going to handle it now. I put on my shoes, marched across the street, and this time I didn't ring the doorbell. I laid on it. I just held my finger down, letting that shrill, obnoxious buzz echo through their sterile white house. I was done playing games. This mosquito was about to get swatted. After about 30 seconds of my continuous doorbell assault, the door flew open, and it was Eleanor again, her face a mask of rage. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" she shrieked, clutching her pink robe. "I'm trying to get your son to move the car that he has, for the third day in a row, parked in my driveway," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I left a note yesterday. He seems to have returned it." Chad appeared behind her, a smirk on his face. He was enjoying this. This was a power trip for him. "It's not a big deal, bro," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I just leave it there for like an hour or two in the morning." "What's the problem?" "The problem, bro," I said, locking eyes with him, "is that it's my property. You are trapping my vehicle. You are making me late for my job. And you are doing it on purpose. It needs to stop. Now." Eleanor stepped in front of her son, puffing out her chest like a mother hen protecting her obnoxious little chick. "Now you listen here," she said, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "There is no need to be so aggressive. People in this neighborhood are usually so much more accommodating. It's a temporary inconvenience. You need to relax." There it was. The little dig, the subtle implication that I was the one who didn't belong, that my reaction was somehow out of line for this accommodating neighborhood. "Mom," I said, taking a step back so her finger was no longer in my personal space, "this has nothing to do with being accommodating. This is about basic property rights and common decency, something you and your son seem to be completely lacking. This is the last time I'm going to ask nicely. Move the car and never park it there again." "Or what?" Chad chimed in from behind his mother, the smirk never leaving his face. "What are you going to do about it?" I just looked at him, a long, hard, silent look. I didn't threaten him. I didn't raise my voice. I just let him see the cold, hard resolve in my eyes. I let him see that he had pushed the wrong button on the wrong man on the wrong day. I turned around without another word and walked back to my house. The ball was in their court. They could choose to de-escalate, to finally show a shred of respect, or they could choose to keep pushing. I went inside and called my first client of the day to tell them I'd be running late. Then I sat in my armchair, watching the black Porsche in my driveway, and I started to think. Not about what I was going to do if he did it again, but what I was going to do when he did it again. Because I knew, with every fiber of my being, that he would. And I knew my response had to be something he would never, ever forget. The next morning, day 4, the Porsche was back. I almost had to laugh. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was almost impressive. It was a declaration that they were untouchable, that the normal rules of society didn't apply to them. My polite requests had failed. My direct confrontation had failed. It was time to escalate to the next level of civilized society, involving the authorities. I called the non-emergency police line. I explained the situation calmly and clearly. A vehicle was repeatedly being parked on my private property without my consent, blocking my own vehicle. About 20 minutes later, a police cruiser rolled down the street. 2 officers got out, a younger man and an older, more seasoned-looking woman. I met them at the end of the driveway and explained the whole story, from day one. I showed them the note. They were sympathetic, but they also had that weary look that cops get when they have to deal with petty neighbor disputes. They went across the street and knocked on the Vance's door. This time, Eleanor came out with a completely different demeanor. She was all sweetness and light, playing the role of the confused, innocent victim. "Oh, officers, thank goodness you're here," she said, her voice full of fake concern. "This man has been harassing us for days. My son just parks his car there for a few minutes in the morning while he gets ready. The street parking is so tight, you know. We're new here and he's been so unwelcoming." She was a master manipulator. She was trying to frame me as the aggressive one, the neighborhood bully. The officers listened patiently, then explained to her that Chad was still trespassing on private property. Chad came out, gave his usual smirking performance, and moved the car. The officers came back over to my side of the street. "Look, sir," the older female officer said to me, her tone apologetic. "We've warned them. We've told them not to park here again. But honestly, our hands are kind of tied. Because it's on your private property and not blocking a public right-of-way like a sidewalk, it's technically a civil matter, not a criminal one. We can't ticket it or tow it ourselves. Your best bet, if it happens again, is to call a private towing company." I thanked them for their time. I knew they'd done what they could, but as I watched them drive away, a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. The Vances had just seen me call the cops, and the only consequence was a brief conversation. To them, this wasn't a punishment. It was a victory. They had seen the limits of the law, and they knew they could operate right up to that line with impunity. And I had a strong suspicion that the very next morning, that black Porsche would be sitting right back in its favorite spot, a silent testament to their triumph. Sure enough, day 5 arrived, and so did the Porsche. It was like he was punching a clock. 7:15 a.m. on the dot. He was mocking me now. He knew the police couldn't do much, and he was reveling in it. It was time for phase 2 of my plan, the tow truck. I had the number for a local 24-hour towing company saved in my phone. I called them up, explained the situation, and they said they'd have a truck out in 30 minutes. I felt a surge of grim satisfaction. This was it. This was a consequence he would understand. A few $100s for the tow, a massive inconvenience to get his car back from the impound lot. That was a language a kid like Chad would speak fluently. The tow truck arrived, a big, hulking beast of a machine. The driver was a burly guy with a thick beard, and he got right to work, backing his truck up to the Porsche. The sound of the heavy-duty engine and the beeping of the reverse alarm was music to my ears. But of course, it couldn't be that easy. The noise brought the Vances running out of their house. Eleanor was in her pink robe again, which seemed to be her official battle uniform. "What is going on here?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with fury. "You can't do this!" "That's my son's car." The tow truck driver, who had clearly dealt with his share of Karens, just ignored her and continued hooking up the Porsche. "Ma'am, the owner of this property has authorized me to remove the vehicle," he said calmly, without looking at her. That's when she went from angry to nuclear. "I will sue you. I will sue your company. I will have your license revoked. This is grand theft auto. I am calling my lawyer right now." She pulled out her phone and started stabbing at the screen, all while continuing to scream threats at the driver. The driver stopped what he was doing and looked from her to the car and then to me. He had a pained look on his face. "Listen, man," he said to me, lowering his voice. "I'm sorry, but I can't take this car, with her threatening lawsuits and all that. My boss has a policy. If the vehicle owner is on the scene and contesting it this aggressively, we have to back off. It's not worth the legal headache for a simple tow. It becomes a civil dispute, and we can't get in the middle of it."
I couldn't believe it. She had bullied the tow truck driver into submission. He unhooked the Porsche, got back in his truck, gave me an apologetic shrug, and drove away. Eleanor stood there on my lawn, phone still in hand, a triumphant, venomous smile on her face. Chad came out and stood next to her, looking smugger than ever. They had won. They had beaten the neighbor, they had beaten the cops, and now they had beaten the tow truck. They had proven that with enough money, enough arrogance, and a complete lack of shame, they were above the rules. They were untouchable. I just stood there in my doorway, watching them celebrate their victory on my property. And in that moment, all the frustration, all the anger, it all melted away and was replaced by a strange, cold calm. I finally understood. I had been trying to solve a problem using a civilized rulebook. But the Van Cess weren't playing by that rulebook. They didn't respect it. They didn't even acknowledge its existence. You can't win a game of chess against someone who just knocks over the pieces and declares themselves the winner. It was time to stop playing their game. It was time to create a new one. A game with my own rules. And in my game, the board was my driveway, the pieces were my tools, and the checkmate was going to be epic. The next few days, I did nothing. I let the Porsche park in my driveway, and I used my wife's car, taking the long way around on the grass. I needed them to get comfortable. I needed them to think they had utterly and completely broken my spirit. Every morning, I'd see Chad get out of his car, and he'd look over at my house with that arrogant smirk, and I'd just watch from the window, my face a blank mask. Let him think he's won. Let the little king sit on his stolen throne. A predator doesn't rush in. He waits. He observes. And he plans the perfect attack. On the inside, my mind was a whirlwind of activity. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was methodical. My garage, my sanctuary, became my war room. At night, after a long day of work at my shop, I'd come home and I'd start a plan. I'm a mechanic, not just a guy who changes oil, but a true craftsman. I specialize in custom restorations. I can take a rusted-out shell of a car and turn it into a showroom masterpiece. I know cars inside and out. I know their strengths, and more importantly, I know their weaknesses. I know how they're put together, which means I know exactly how to take them apart. I looked at that Porsche not as a car, but as a complex mechanical puzzle. Smashing with a baseball bat would be crude, illegal, and ultimately unsatisfying. It would make me no better than them. No, my response had to be elegant. It had to be precise. It had to be so perfectly executed that it would leave them speechless, confused, and utterly powerless. It had to be an act of mechanical poetry. So, I started to formulate the plan. A plan I called Operation Deconstruction. I wasn't going to damage the car. Damage can be fixed. I was going to disassemble it, piece by piece. I would remove key components, rendering it completely immobile, but without actually breaking anything. It was a beautiful, elegant solution. It wasn't vandalism. It was advanced mechanical disassembly on an unauthorized, abandoned vehicle on my private property. See how much better that sounds? I made a list. The wheels, obviously. The battery. The windshield wipers. The side mirrors. And for the grand finale, the piece de resistance, the windshield. I knew from experience that a modern Porsche windshield isn't just glued in. It's a structural component bonded to the frame. Removing one without breaking it is a delicate, surgical procedure that requires special tools and a steady hand. But putting one back in? That's a job for a professional, and it's expensive. My plan was perfect. It was quiet, it was clean, and it would leave behind a monument to Chad's own stupidity. But I'm not a fool. I knew that even with my clever plan, the Van Cess would scream bloody murder and call the cops again. I had to build a legal fortress around myself. I needed to be able to stand there, calm and collected, and explain my actions in a way that would leave the police with no choice but to call it a civil matter. So, I spent 2 full nights glued to my computer, diving deep into the black hole of municipal codes and state property laws. I printed out everything I could find on abandoned vehicles on private property, and I found the loopholes, the beautiful, glorious loopholes. In my state, a vehicle left on private property for more than 72 consecutive hours without the owner's consent can be considered abandoned. Now, Chad moved his car every day, so I couldn't use that directly. But the repeated trespassing was key. I started documenting everything. I took pictures of the Porsche in my driveway every single morning with a copy of that day's newspaper in the shot to timestamp it. I had over a week's worth of evidence. Then I found the real gem. A little-known ordinance about property abatement, which stated that a property owner has the right to remove a nuisance or obstruction from their land, provided they have made a good faith effort to to have the owner remove it first. My polite request, the note, the call to the police, that was my good faith effort. My final step was to make one last, officially documented attempt. I typed up a formal-looking letter. It was a thing of beauty. It cited the specific state statutes and local ordinances I had researched. It detailed the dates and times of the repeated trespassing. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that his vehicle was an unauthorized obstruction and that if it was not removed and the trespassing did not cease immediately, I, the property owner, would take all necessary and legal steps to abate the nuisance, including the partial or complete disassembly of the vehicle for removal. I made 2 copies. I sent one via certified mail, return receipt requested, to the Vance residence. They'd have to sign for it. There would be a legal record that they had been warned. The other copy I laminated. That was my secret weapon, ready for the final confrontation. The certified letter was delivered on a Friday. I saw the mail carrier go to the door. I saw Eleanor sign for it. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for the mouse to walk into it one last time. The weekend came and went. No Porsche. I think the certified letter actually spooked them for a minute. They probably read all the legal jargon and thought I was going to sue them. I started to wonder if my plan was for nothing, if they had finally learned their lesson. But entitlement is a hard habit to break. Like a virus, it can go dormant, but it's always waiting to flare up again. Monday morning came. 7:15 a.m. I looked out the window. Nothing. 7:20. Nothing. My heart sank a little. Was it over? And then, at 7:25, it came cruising down the street. The black Porsche. Chad pulled into my driveway, got out, and gave my front door a long, defiant stare before swaggering back to his house. He called my bluff. He thought my letter was just empty words. He had no idea that he had just given me the green light. He had just parked his car on the operating table, and Dr. Marcus was about to begin surgery. That night, I didn't sleep. I waited. I watched their house until every light was out. At 2 a.m., under the pale glow of a half-moon, Operation Deconstruction began. I rolled my big floor jack out of the garage. It was one of those professional-grade, low-profile jacks, designed to slip under cars like the Porsche. It made almost no sound as I wheeled it across the paving stones. The first step was getting it off the ground. I found the jacking points on the Porsche's frame, and with a few smooth, quiet pumps, I had the entire car floating a few inches off my driveway. Next came the wheels. I had my electric impact wrench, which is surprisingly quiet. It makes more of a high-pitched than a loud noise. I had the lug nuts off all 4 wheels in under 2 minutes. I carefully stacked the beautiful black alloy wheels and their expensive Michelin tires next to my garage door. The car now sat awkwardly on the jack stands I placed under the frame, looking sad and helpless. Next, the battery. I popped the hood, or in a Porsche's case, the front trunk or frunk. I had the right size socket to disconnect the terminals. I pulled the heavy battery out and set it next to the wheels. Now the car was completely dead. No lights, no alarm, no way to even put it in neutral. Then I moved on to the smaller, more annoying pieces. The windshield wipers came off with a simple click. The side mirrors on a Porsche are held on by a few bolts hidden behind the interior door panel, but I knew the trick to pop the mirror glass out first to access them. A few minutes later, the sleek, aerodynamic mirrors were sitting in a neat little row next to the battery. Everything I was doing was methodical, clean, and completely reversible by a highly paid professional. The final piece was the windshield. This was the masterstroke. I had a special tool, a long, flexible blade with 2 handles, designed to cut through the thick urethane adhesive that holds a windshield in place. It's a 2-person job, usually, but I'm good. I work the blade back and forth, slowly, patiently, slicing through the seal. After about 20 minutes of careful work, the windshield was free. I used 2 large suction cups to lift the massive piece of curved glass out of the frame and carefully leaned it against the side of my house, completely intact. I stood back and admired my work. The Porsche sat there on jack stands, eyeless and empty, its interior exposed to the night air. It was a hollowed-out shell, a monument to arrogance. It was perfect. I packed up my tools, went inside, showered, and put on my best suit. I had a feeling tomorrow was going to be a very important day, and I wanted to look the part. I was up before the sun, a fresh pot of coffee brewing. I sat in my armchair by the window, sipping my coffee and waiting. It felt like the calm before a storm. The street was quiet, the sky slowly turning from inky black to a soft, pre-dawn gray. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in weeks. I had taken control. I had met their chaos with my order, their disrespect with my precision. Whatever happened next, I knew I had handled it my way. At exactly 7:25 a.m., just as the sun was starting to peek over the trees, Chad's front door opened. He came strolling out, a cup of coffee in one hand, car keys dangling from the other. He had that same arrogant swagger. He wasn't even looking at the car, just staring at his phone as he walked. He got about halfway across the street before he finally looked up. The change was instantaneous. His confident stride faltered. He stopped dead in the middle of the road. His jaw went slack. The coffee cup slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the asphalt, splashing brown liquid all over his expensive sneakers. He just stood there, frozen, for what felt like a full minute, his brain trying to process the impossible scene in front of him. His prized Porsche, his symbol of power and wealth, was sitting on blocks, tireless, its front windshield gone, looking like it had been picked clean by vultures. He let out a noise that was somewhere between a gasp and a scream. Then he turned and sprinted back into his house, yelling, "Mom! M-O-M!" I took another slow, satisfying sip of my coffee. The curtain was rising on the final act, and I had the best seat in the house. A minute later, the front door of the Vance house burst open, and the stars of the show made their grand entrance. Chad was right behind his mother, who was, of course, wearing her signature pink robe. Her hair was a mess, her face was puffy with sleep, but her eyes were wide with pure, undiluted rage. They stormed across the street and stopped at the end of my driveway, their faces a perfect picture of horrified disbelief. This was the scene, the thumbnail to my entire ordeal. The angry woman in the pink robe, the shocked kid in the blue shirt, and the systematically dismantled Porsche. Eleanor found her voice first. It wasn't a yell, it was a shriek, a high-pitched, piercing sound that probably scared birds out of the trees a block away. "What did you do? What did you do to my son's car?" I had been waiting for my cue. I calmly placed my coffee cup down, stood up, and opened my front door. I walked out onto my porch, folding my arms, and leaned against the railing. I gave them my most pleasant, neighborly smile. "Good morning, Eleanor." "Chad," I said, my voice calm and even. "It looks like you have a parking problem, and a tire problem, and a windshield problem. A whole lot of problems, really." Chad just pointed at the car, sputtering, unable to form a complete sentence. You destroyed it," he finally managed to get out. "Destroyed it?" I asked, feigning surprise. "Oh no, son. I would never do that. Everything is perfectly safe. The wheels are right there by the garage. The battery, the mirrors, the wipers, they're all accounted for. Even the windshield is over there, safe and sound. I just removed the obstruction from my property, as I warned you I would." Eleanor's face went from furious to crimson. "I am calling the police. You're going to jail for this. Vandalism. Destruction of property. You'll be paying for this for the rest of your life." "You go right ahead and call them," I said, my smile never wavering. "I've been waiting for them." She whipped out her phone and started dialing 911, screaming into the phone about how her neighbor has gone crazy and destroyed our car. As she was doing that, I walked calmly back into my house and retrieved the laminated letter and the stack of dated photographs. By the time I came back out, 2 police cars were already pulling up, sirens blazing. It was the same 2 officers from before. They got out of their cars, saw the dismantled Porsche, and their eyes went wide. They had seen a lot of things, I'm sure, but probably not this. Eleanor immediately ran up to them, launching into a hysterical tirade. "Arrest him. Arrest that man right now. He did this. He destroyed our property. It's a $100,000 car." The older female officer held up a hand to calm her down. "Ma'am, please. Let's just figure out what happened here." She turned to me. Her face was stern, but I could see a flicker of something else in her eyes. Maybe curiosity, maybe even a little bit of amusement. "Sir," she said, her voice all business. "Can you explain what happened here?" "I'd be happy to, officer," I said. I handed her the laminated letter. As you can see from this document, a copy of which was sent via certified mail and signed for by Mrs. Vance on Friday. The vehicle was designated as an unauthorized and abandoned nuisance on my private property. I have photographic evidence of it being parked here, without my consent, every day for the last 2 weeks. I handed her the stack of photos. She took them and started flipping through them, her partner looking over her shoulder. The letter clearly states, I continued, my voice steady and clear, that if the trespassing did not cease, I would take all necessary steps to abate the nuisance, including the disassembly of the vehicle for removal. The vehicle was parked here again this morning, in direct violation of that final legal warning. So, I abated the nuisance. No property was destroyed. Every component has been carefully and professionally removed and stored. They're free to have the car towed to a professional mechanic who can reassemble it for them. I was simply removing an obstruction from my land, as is my legal right according to State Statute 34B, subsection 12, regarding property abatement. The 2 officers just stared at me. Then they looked at the letter, at the photos, and back at the car. The male officer was trying very hard not to smile. He had to turn his head and cough. The female officer read the letter one more time, then looked over at a still sputtering Eleanor. "Ma'am," the officer said, her voice now flat and official. "Did you receive this letter?" "It was just a bunch of nonsense. I'm not a lawyer," Eleanor shrieked. "But you did receive it," the officer stated. "And your son parked the car here again after you received it." She handed the letter and photos back to me. She turned to Eleanor and Chad. Based on the documentation he's provided, he was acting within his rights to remove an obstruction from his property. The way he chose to do it is unorthodox, but he hasn't technically destroyed anything. There's no evidence of criminal vandalism here. This is a civil matter. We can't arrest him. The look on Eleanor's face was a sight to behold. It was a mixture of confusion, fury, and the slow, dawning horror of utter and complete defeat. She had no power here. Her money didn't matter. Her threats were empty. Her screaming was just noise. I had beaten her, not by yelling louder or being richer, but by being smarter. I had used the law, the very system she thought she was above, as my weapon, and it had worked perfectly. So what are we supposed to do? Chad asked, his voice now the pathetic whine of a spoiled child. The officer shrugged. "You can call a tow truck," she said. "A flatbed, probably, and then you'll have to have it towed to a dealership or a mechanic to have it all put back together. Like I said, it's a civil matter. You can try to sue him for the costs if you want. But I suspect, given this letter, you won't have much of a case." And with that, she and her partner got back in their cars and drove away, leaving the Van Cess standing in the middle of the street, next to the carcass of their car, utterly and completely alone. The aftermath was even more satisfying than the main event. A flatbed tow truck eventually showed up, and it took 2 men the better part of an hour to figure out how to winch the wheel-less Porsche onto the truck. Then they had to make a second trip to pick up the wheels, the battery, the mirrors, and windshield. The whole neighborhood came out to watch the show, sipping their coffee from their porches, a quiet, collective smile on their faces. The Van Cess had terrorized everyone with their noise and their attitude, and this was the public shaming they so richly deserved. I later found out from a friend who works at the local Porsche dealership that the bill to have the car professionally reassembled, recalibrated, and have a new windshield properly bonded and sealed came to just over $9,000. A drop in the bucket for them, maybe, but it was the principle of the thing. They had to pay in cash for their own stupidity. They never parked in my driveway again. In fact, they barely even looked at my house again. The swagger was gone. The smirks were gone. They had been humbled. About 2 months later, a for sale sign went up in their yard. They sold the house at a loss, just to get out of the neighborhood where they had become a running joke. The last I saw of them, they were loading up their things, their faces sullen and defeated. And as they drove away, I stood on my porch and I gave them a little wave goodbye. This whole experience taught me a few things. It taught me that sometimes you have to fight fire not with fire, but with precision engineering. You have to meet ignorance not with anger, but with intelligence. And it reaffirmed what my Sarah always used to say. There's a deep and profound peace in clean lines and everything being in its proper place. My driveway is my driveway. It's a simple fact of the universe. And that Porsche, as beautiful as it was not in its proper place. I just helped it along on its journey. The new family that moved into the Van Cess old house are wonderful. They're a young couple with 2 little kids. They reintroduced themselves, brought over a bottle of wine, and they even asked me for some gardening tips. They're planting climbing roses along the front of their house. Sarah would have loved that. My neighborhood is quiet again. The clean lines have been restored. And every morning when I walk out to my truck, I look at those gray paving stones in my driveway, and I smile. Because they're more than just a place to park my car. They're a symbol of respect, of boundaries, and of the simple, satisfying fact that sometimes the good guys win. If stories like this make your blood boil and then fill you with that warm, satisfying glow of justice being served, you're definitely in the right place. This is where we celebrate the quiet victories, the moments where bullies get their comeuppance and common sense prevails. Subscribe, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and let me know if you've ever had a neighbor who needed a lesson in property lines. Let's dive into the next one. Well, family, I gotta tell you, I thought that was the end of the story. I really did. The Van Cess packed up their melted spoon sculpture and their bad attitudes and vanished like a bad smell in a strong wind. The new neighbors, the Lees, moved in, and it was like the neighborhood could finally take a collective deep breath. Peace had been restored. My driveway was mine again, my mornings were quiet, and my biggest problem was a stubborn patch of crabgrass near the oak tree. I went back to my life, pouring my love and attention into restoring classic cars, spending my evenings on the porch listening to the cicadas, feeling Sarah's presence in the garden she planted. I figured the Van Cess were just a bad memory, a crazy story I'd tell my future grandkids one day. But here's something I've learned about people like Eleanor and Chad Vance. They don't see endings, they just see intermissions. They believe the whole world is a stage for their own personal drama, and they will not be written out of the script. About 3 months after they moved, just when I was starting to forget the specific shade of pink of that ridiculous robe, I got a piece of mail that made my blood run cold. It wasn't a bill, it wasn't a catalog. It was a thick, creamy envelope with the embossed return address of a high-powered law firm downtown, Sterling, Finch, and Associates. I knew, before I even opened it, that the sequel I never asked for was about to begin. Eleanor Vance was suing me. The letter was a masterpiece of legal nonsense. I had to read it 3 times to fully absorb the sheer audacity of it. She was suing me for, and I'm not making this up, $500,000. The claims were spectacular. Intentional infliction of emotional distress on her gentle and sensitive son, Chad. Malicious destruction of private property, citing the $9,000 reassembly bill from the Porsche dealership. And my personal favorite, deprivation of use, claiming Chad couldn't get to his very important. Well, it didn't say what was so important, just that he couldn't get there because his car was in pieces. They were trying to frame my precise, surgical act of self-defense as a crazed, violent rampage. They were trying to paint me as the villain, a dangerous and unhinged man who flew into a rage and destroyed a young boy's car for no reason. The letter demanded a settlement and a public apology. Otherwise, they would pursue the matter to the fullest extent of the law. I sat there at my kitchen table, the letter in my hand, and I just started laughing. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a man who has been pushed so far past the edge of reason that all you can do is find the dark, twisted humor in it all. They really thought they could bully me with a fancy lawyer and a big, scary number. They still didn't get it. They still didn't know who they were dealing with. They thought I was just some old mechanic. They forgot that I'm the man who documented everything. I'm the man who laminated the warning letter. I'm the man who plays chess, not checkers. My first call was to my nephew, David, who's a paralegal. He gave me the name of a lawyer, a woman named Jasmine Carter. She's a shark, Uncle Marcus, he'd said. But she's our shark. I walked in her office the next day, a sleek, modern place downtown that smelled like success and expensive coffee. Jasmine was a sharp, impeccably dressed black woman in her late 30s with a smile that was both warm and deadly. I laid the whole story out for her, from the first day the Porsche appeared in my driveway to the final, glorious moment the flatbed towed it away. I showed her my folder, the photos, the laminated letter, the certified mail receipt Eleanor had signed. She listened intently, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she leaned back in her leather chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Mr. Jones," she said, her voice smooth as silk, "this is the most beautiful case I've seen all year. It's a slam dunk. They don't have a leg to stand on." Then her smile sharpened. "But they don't know that yet. People like the Van Cess, they're used to throwing money and lawyers at problems until they go away. They think they can intimidate you into a quick settlement. So, we're not just going to defend you. We're going to let them run up their legal bills. We're going to let them build a beautiful, expensive ship, and then we're going to sink it in the middle of the ocean." I like her immediately. We weren't just going to win. We were going to make them regret they ever learned my name. The battle wasn't over. It had just moved to a new, more expensive battlefield. While the lawyers were sending letters back and forth, Eleanor Vance, bless her vindictive little heart, decided to open up a second front. She couldn't bully me in person anymore, so she decided to try and burn my world down from a distance, using the modern-day equivalent of a pitchfork and torch, the internet. It started with my business, Marcus Jones Custom Restorations. My shop is my legacy. It's got a 5-star rating on Google, built on 15 years of honest, hard work. One morning, I logged on to check my business page, and there it was, a brand new 1-star review. The name on the profile was Concerned Mom 123. The review was a work of fiction that would have made Shakespeare blush. It said, and I quote, "Do not use this mechanic. The owner, Marcus Jones, is a violent and unstable man. He has a history of unprovoked rage. He caused thousands of dollars in damage to my son's car and has terrorized our family. He is a menace to the community and should not be trusted with your property." My stomach dropped. This was a low blow, even for her. She was attacking my livelihood, the reputation I had spent my entire adult life building. Before I could even process it, another one popped up. This one was from Justice for Chad. Then another from Oakmont Watcher. All 1-star. All telling the same fabricated story. She was creating fake profiles, carpet bombing my business with lies. But she didn't stop there. She took her crusade to the Oakmont Hills Community Facebook group and the Nextdoor app. She posted a long, rambling sob story about how her family was driven from the neighborhood by a racist and violent neighbor. She conveniently left out the part about the Porsche being in my driveway, of course. In her version, the car was parked legally on the street, and I, in a fit of rage, came onto her property and destroyed it. It was a bald-faced lie, but a dangerous one. In today's world, an accusation like that can stick, whether it's true or not. I felt a wave of helpless anger wash over me. How do you fight a ghost? How do you defend yourself against anonymous lies on the internet? For a day or two, I was genuinely worried. My phone was quieter than usual. I started to wonder if the poison was working. And then, something amazing happened. The community started to fight back. The first comment on the Facebook post was from my new neighbor, David Lee. "I live across the street from Mr. Jones now," he wrote. "He's the kindest, most decent man you could ever hope to meet. I find this story very hard to believe." Then came Mr. Henderson, who's lived down the street for 40 years. "I know Marcus Jones, and I remember the Van Cess. I also remember their son's car being parked in Marcus's private driveway for 2 solid weeks. This post is a lie." And then the floodgates opened. It was like the entire neighborhood and all of my past customers rose up as one to defend me. People started posting the real story in the comments. People I hadn't spoken to in years were sharing their own positive experiences with me and my shop. The 1-star reviews on my Google page were quickly buried under an avalanche of new 5-star reviews. "Marcus is a master of his craft and a true gentleman," one said. "Ignore the fake reviews from the crazy lady who got kicked out of the neighborhood," wrote another. My customers started posting pictures of the cars I'd restored for them. Gleaming Mustangs, pristine Corvettes, beautiful old Cadillacs. The whole thing backfired on Eleanor in the most spectacular way. Her attempt to ruin my reputation had turned into the single greatest marketing campaign my business had ever seen. My phone started ringing off the hook. People were calling not just for work, but to offer their support. Some people even called just to say they'd read the story online and wanted to book a future restoration project with a legendary mechanic who took apart a Porsche to make a point. Eleanor Vance had tried to burn me down, but she'd only succeeded in lighting a beacon that showed the whole world the quality of my work and the strength of my community. The final act of this ridiculous drama took place about 6 months after the first letter arrived. It was time for the depositions. That's where the lawyers get to question the other side under oath before trial. We all met in a sterile, soulless conference room in a downtown office building. It was me and my lawyer, Jasmine, on one side of a long, polished table. And on the other side sat Eleanor, Chad, and their lawyer, a slick-looking guy named Mr. Finch who looked like he ironed his own face every morning. Eleanor was dressed in a severe-looking gray suit, trying to look like a respectable businesswoman instead of a screaming harpy in a pink robe. Chad was slouched in his chair, wearing a polo shirt that was too tight, looking bored and annoyed. The air in the room was thick with tension. Their lawyer, Finch, went first. He questioned me for 2 hours, trying to trip me up, trying to paint me as an angry, aggressive man who overreacted. He'd ask questions like, "Mr. Jones, would you say you have a temper? And did you enjoy causing thousands of dollars in damages to this young man's vehicle?" I stayed calm. I answered every question truthfully and simply. Yes, I was frustrated. No, I did not damage the vehicle. I disassembled it. No, I did not enjoy it. I enjoyed the peace and quiet that followed. With every answer, I could see Finch getting more and more frustrated. He was trying to land a punch, but I was just slipping every jab. Then it was Jasmine's turn. And let me tell you, it was like watching a master artist at work. She was polite, she was calm, but she was absolutely lethal. She started with Chad. She had him recount the events, and his story was full of holes. He'd say he only parked there for a few minutes, and she'd pull out one of my timestamp photos showing his car there for hours. He'd claim he didn't know he wasn't supposed to park there, and she produced the certified mail receipt his mother had signed, warning him in explicit legal detail. With every question, Chad got smaller and smaller in his chair, his answers turning into mumbled "I don't know s" and "I don't recall s." Then she turned to Eleanor. She let Eleanor give her whole dramatic, tearful performance about being a concerned mother who was terrified of her erratic neighbor. Jasmine just let her talk, nodding sympathetically. And when Eleanor was done, Jasmine slid a thick binder across the table. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice dangerously sweet, "I want to talk about your online activities. Do you recognize these posts?" The binder was filled with printouts of every fake review, every Facebook post, every lie she had spread online. Eleanor's face went pale. I've never seen those before," she stammered. "That's interesting," Jasmine said, pulling out another file. "Because our digital forensics expert traced the IP addresses of every single one of these posts. And they all trace back to 2 locations, your new home and the IP address of your personal cell phone." The room went silent. Finch, their lawyer, actually closed his eyes for a second, like he was in physical pain. Jasmine had just caught his client committing perjury. Under oath. "So, I'll ask you again, Mrs. Vance," Jasmine said, her voice now like ice. "Did you write these posts, knowingly spreading false and defamatory information about my client with the intent to harm his business and reputation?" Eleanor just stared, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She knew she was caught. Finch immediately stood up. "We're taking a 5-minute recess," he announced, and practically dragged Eleanor and Chad out of the room. Jasmine just looked at me and gave me a slow, deliberate wink. When Finch came back in, his whole demeanor had changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the weary look of a man who just wants the bleeding to stop. "My clients are prepared to drop the lawsuit, effective immediately," he said. But Jasmine wasn't done. "That's not good enough," she said. "Your clients filed a frivolous, malicious lawsuit, and then engaged in a campaign of slander that could have destroyed Mr. Jones's business. We will be filing a countersuit for defamation and recovery of all legal fees. Finch's face went even paler. He knew they would lose, and lose badly. After a frantic, whispered negotiation, we reached an agreement. They would drop their lawsuit. They would pay for every penny I'd spent on legal fees. In the final, beautiful, poetic condition, Eleanor Vance had to post a full, public retraction and apology on every single platform where she had slandered me, and it had to stay up for 30 days. The war was over, and my victory was total. A week later, I sat on my porch, scrolled through the community Facebook page, and read the court-approved apology. It was a dry, legalese-filled statement, but the humiliation dripped from every word. My reputation was cleared, my wallet was whole, and my driveway was, and would forever be, my own. And I have a feeling the Van Cess will think twice before they underestimate a quiet man in a quiet neighborhood again. If stories like this, stories where bullies get a full education in the law of consequences, get your heart pumping, then you've found your people. This is what we're all about: truth, justice, and a healthy dose of well-deserved karma. Subscribe, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and let's get ready for the next time a Karen picks a fight with the wrong one. Let's dive into the next one.